Listen up. This is the one question you need to answer this year. What would it look like if I took a little bit of time to spruce up my LinkedIn and go all out on this professional social media platform? Could I land my dream job? Get a nice salary increase? Make some new friends and connections? What about launch your dream career? Now, my life and business totally changed when I did go all in on LinkedIn. And I am forever grateful because we have the LinkedIn queen here with us today. Hala Taha, dubbed the podcast princess, is the host of the Young and Profiting podcast, a frequently named #1 business and entrepreneurship podcast across all apps. She is the founder and CEO of Yap Media, a business podcast network with an award-winning social media podcast marketing agency for top podcasters, celebrities, and CEOs. And we are going to talk about all of the things that Hala is an expert on. Networking, marketing, social media, personal branding, side hustles, entrepreneurship, and podcasting. And of course, Hala is no stranger to sticky floors and breaking free from them. Are you ready? You are listening to the podcast From Now to Next, the podcast that empowers women to get seen, get heard, and get promoted. I'm your host, Errrr Rooney, and I've made it my mission to help you break free from the sticky floors, those limiting beliefs and toxic behaviors to bust through the glass ceiling. I'm obsessed with all things growth and abundance, and I'm here to talk you through the tried and true secrets to get you to level up your career and your life. We talk about the hard stuff here: imposter syndrome, perfectionism, fear, and burnout. So pull up a seat, pop in an earbud, and let's dive in. Welcome to the podcast From Now to Next. Hala, how are you? I am so excited for this conversation.
I'm doing great, Erica. I'm looking forward to speaking with you as well.
Oh my goodness. Well, you are so crazy busy. You are the host of the podcast, Young and Profiting. You are the CEO of Yap Media, and you are doing all of the things. You have almost 230,000 followers on LinkedIn that gets over 8 million expressions, impressions, likes, comments a month. So I cannot wait to hear some of your wisdom, but I would love to just kick off for those of my audience who might not know who you are and your come up story. Who is Hala Taha and how did we get here?
I love this question. So let me start with who I am now. Like you mentioned, I'm the CEO of Yap Media. That's an award-winning social media and podcast production agency. And then I'm also running the #1 self-improvement and business podcast network where I grow and monetize shows. I basically get all these top business podcast sponsorships. So those are my main businesses. I also run the Yap Academy, which is my LinkedIn masterclass. And soon we're going to be rolling out a podcast masterclass. So it's like my educational arm of my business. And this all started from me being the host of Young and Profiting podcast. So I've been the host of this podcast for almost 6 years. I started in April of 2018, and I started it as a side hustle. Previous to starting the podcast, I actually started my career in radio. I worked at Hot 97, the #1 hip hop and R&B station in the world. I worked on the Angie Martinez show as the assistant producer, started as an intern who worked for free basically for 3 years. I never got paid at that station. Actually, the whole time I was there, I was technically an unpaid intern for 3 years. And I just learned everything about broadcasting and really fell in love. At the same time, while working at the station, I had side projects. I would basically host these online radio shows at the time, which were basically the precursors of podcasts. It was before podcast was really a thing. And I'd go to an actual physical studio with some of the upcoming DJs, many of whom are really famous now. And I used to host these radio shows and interview people like Chris Brown and Fabulous. And I would just do this on the side of me working at Hot 97. So then I basically grew my chops as an on-air personality. I started doing commercials on Hot 97. They started bringing me on air at Hot 97, as a guest sometimes on the shows. And then I really fell in love. I ended up leaving Hot 97 and I started this blog site called the Sorority of Hip Hop. I was upset with Hot 97 for not giving me a paying job after 3 years and dropping out of college for that job and everything like that. So I left. I started this blog and it blew up. I went back to school, finished my undergrad, and within 3 months, we were one of the most popular hip hop and R&B entertainment sites in the world. And basically, I recruited all these female bloggers who were around my age in their 20s, who were in other organizations that weren't giving them opportunities. So I recruited people from iHeart, Def Jam, VH1, MTV, all these young ladies. I taught them how to blog. I learned how to build websites. And then we ended up becoming basically an events organization where we'd host parties and we had this blog. And I did that for about 3 years until MTV basically reached out to us for a reality TV show. It was right after the Jersey Shore had ended and they filmed us all summer. They must have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into us at the time. They got us a studio on Broadway and we basically filmed the whole summer. And I was so excited because essentially for 3 years, I was an unpaid intern at Hot 97. Then for the next 3 years, I was building this website and I'd have odd jobs and things like that. But I, again, was just investing everything into some opportunity where I wasn't really getting compensated, even though I was working so hard. And MTV, 2 weeks before they were supposed to air the show, pulled the plug. And at that point, I had basically gotten rejected from terrestrial radio. I also had an opportunity at Sirius XM where I was basically hired for 2 weeks and then fired after 2 weeks. I have no idea why. And then I was not chosen for MTV. So I was also rejected by TV. So I was just down in the dumps. I totally felt like, okay, this is not for me. I guess I got to go get a normal job. Let me just go get my MBA, go into corporate. And so then I ended up going into corporate and literally thought I was going to stay there for the rest of my life. I did really well in corporate. I worked at Hewlett Packard and I got promoted like 5 times in 4 years. But luckily, in my last year at Hewlett Packard, I got bored. I essentially didn't get this internal opportunity that I wanted. I used to volunteer at HP for their like youth organizations and things like that. I didn't get this like global presidential role that I wanted. I was essentially the face of the young employees at Hewlett Packard. I was very popular at that organization. I didn't get something that I wanted. And then I found myself with all this free time. And I was like, why don't I start a podcast? Because I know how to do this. I know how to do social media. I know how to produce. Now podcasts are a thing. It seems accessible now. Previous to that, this was 2018. So podcasts have been around since like 2012, but it was really technical and complicated. And in 2018, I was like, well, I thought everybody told me it was too late to start a podcast, which is just so funny. And people were like really against it. They're like, you already did this, like it's saturated, don't start it. And I was like, well, I can do this. So let me just start it. And then I just built it on the side. And that's how I started Young and Profiting Podcast. So why don't I stop there? Because I know that was quite a long story.
Oh, I love that. And one of my favorite things here, and I'm looking through, is it through all of this is, number one, this was 6 years ago. So that is a big chunk of time where you had what I like to call a bunch of fresh starts. A lot of people might call them a little bit of failures or bumps in the road. My very first question then following all of that is, how did you continuously find the confidence to keep showing up and trying new things?
Well, because I was getting really cool opportunities, right? So I knew that I was not dumb or untalented or anything like this, because if you're those things, you don't get opportunities. You don't get to work at Hot 97 and be the assistant of Angie Martinez for 3 years. You don't get your TV show on MTV and get filmed for a month, with just some website idea that you had if you're not talented. You know what I'm saying? So I had all these at bats. It's just sometimes I'd swing and hit a home run and sometimes I'd swing and miss. And it was only until I just missed consecutively and I felt like time was running out. After the MTV thing, I just felt really just down about myself and about my future, and more so that I wanted to improve myself. Like I needed to invest in myself. I kept putting myself out there for other people. I built this website and I had 50 girls that were under me. I was at Hewlett Packard and I was running all these youth organizations and I had people under me. And I just constantly felt like I was putting everybody first before myself. And then finally, I was like, okay, let me invest in myself. Let me get my MBA. Let me go into corporate, make my own salary, reach 6 figures, which was like my goal at the time. And, then I went from there. So I just needed to work on myself for a few years. And sometimes that's okay. It's like I took a break from my dream for about 4 years, but I learned so much in the process. And I'm actually really happy that I did that, because I don't think I'd be as successful as I am today as a business owner had I not had my corporate experience at HP and then later Disney streaming services, because I did have Yap as a side hustle for 3 years before I took it full time and started my own businesses.
Well, I love this story because it just shows how you are consistently showing up, even though it's not taking off. And I think a lot of people will look at a woman like you and they're like, well, she's so successful and she's done all these things and it's just been so easy for her. That's why she's got it this way. For all of those people that would say it's just been so easy, what would you say back?
Oh, it's not been
Like,
easy
hell no.
at all. So I would say that honestly, once you have an idea that's hits, it could get pretty easy and accelerate really fast. So Young and Profiting, if you think about it, was my 5th or 6th show. And even with Young and Profiting, it took 2 years before we skyrocketed. It was 2 years of like, I was growing on LinkedIn. Certain things were really popping off. Like I became an influencer on LinkedIn first. My podcast for 2 years was big. We were technically a top 10 how-to podcast, but the downloads were stagnant. I was getting like 3,000 to 5,000 downloads a month, which in the grand scheme of things now is like nothing. Back then, I was proud of that and happy with that, and that kept me going. But to have consistent downloads for 2 years, I was doing the same things over and over again and not thinking outside of the box. And it was only until I started realizing, it was like really one aha moment. I kept trying to grow on Apple. And that was my only focus for a long time. Today, I'm doing great on Apple. I'm always top 10 entrepreneurship, top 10 business on Apple. So my podcast is huge on Apple now, but for a long time it wasn't. And that's because a lot of the legacy podcasters that have been there since like 2012, they were getting all the listeners. And it was really hard for me to get discovered on that app. And I kept just trying to do the same things over and over again, and it wasn't working. It wasn't until I realized that there's 70 different apps out there. There's Castbox, there's Player FM, there's Google Play. And then I started teaming up with those apps because those apps needed users. I had a following on LinkedIn, and I'd basically trade my following on LinkedIn to get promoted on those apps. And that's when I first blew up after 2 years. It was me getting creative and thinking outside the box and realizing, all right, I'm not going to make it on Apple right now. How can I become a big podcaster and make noise in this industry and be relevant without being huge on Apple? Because that seems impossible. Now it's like the same thing with YouTube. It's pretty much impossible to get big on YouTube, right? So what are the other things that I can do to get relevancy? And it was becoming the #1 podcaster on Castbox. Now I think I have like 300,000 subscribers on Castbox. I'm one of the biggest podcasters on that Android app, and that's the top Android app, right? So I figured out other avenues to sort of establish my presence as a top podcaster.
I love this. And I keep hearing LinkedIn come in here. And one of my favorite listening moments that I heard when I was listening to a podcast with you on it was where you talked about, somebody mentioned that you had more followers than the CEO of HP at one time. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I started my LinkedIn journey in corporate, at first I thought like I was going to get a lot of, eye rolling and people would get upset. And at first they did, like my colleagues, peers would be like, why are you doing this? Like, aren't you scared that people are going to think like that you're trying to get another job, or like, what are you doing? And then as I started getting more followers, actually the opposite happened. The executives at HP wanted me to train their sales leaders on LinkedIn. They would then start inviting me to all the conferences to host their booths or interview the CEO or CMO on stage at the town halls or whatever it would be. And then also take pictures with the CEO on my LinkedIn and promote the conferences and things like that on my LinkedIn because they knew that I had a large following. And same thing with Disney streaming services. They actually poached me because of my presence on LinkedIn, and I got a great job over there. And then same thing, they wanted me to leverage my LinkedIn for their promotions and things like that.
I love it. And I love LinkedIn. It is my favorite social media platform out there. As a chief people officer, it's kind of a no-brainer. But why are you so passionate about LinkedIn? What is it about that platform in all of the other platforms that we have today that makes it so amazing?
Well, I think people on LinkedIn are really trying to improve their lives. They're trying to level up their careers. They're trying to learn more about self-improvement, educate themselves. Whereas other platforms are really for entertainment, like Instagram, TikTok. People want to lose themselves, get entertained. On LinkedIn, people want to learn and improve their careers and businesses. So people are primed for sales conversations. Everybody on LinkedIn, for the most part, is college educated. Most people make over $75,000 a year, so they can afford your services. So if you're an entrepreneur or small business owner, LinkedIn is such a great place to be. And my favorite part about LinkedIn is that there's still so much opportunity. There's 135 million daily active users on LinkedIn, and only 6% of those people are content creators. So there's so much opportunity to be the lead in your niche on LinkedIn. The other thing I'll say is that there's still lots of organic reach. So on Instagram, you really got to use like boosting services. On YouTube, you've really got to do paid ads if you want to get anywhere. On LinkedIn, you don't have to spend any money. You just need to understand how the algorithm works. And I personally am always giving out free tips, free webinars and things like that, where I go over the LinkedIn algorithm and teach people how they can go viral on LinkedIn and get the visibility that they deserve.
Absolutely. And I have sat in on a couple of your master classes. You did one for my group chief, and then you just host all of these ones on LinkedIn for free, and you give away so much information. And I would love to dive into that. If you are looking to grow your audience, or should you focus on audience? Should you focus on followers, engagement? What is it?
Yeah. So really on LinkedIn, it's understanding the tactics. It's not necessarily about your content. It's understanding how the algorithm works and the tactics, and understanding the different viral actions that people take on LinkedIn and how those viral actions are weighted differently. So for example, on LinkedIn, there's a number of viral actions that people can take, like comment, share, DM, right? Those are all the different viral actions, and they're all weighted differently. So if somebody comments on your stuff, that is about 1 point. If somebody likes your stuff, that's 1 point. Somebody comments, 2 points. A share is 4 points. A DM is worth even more points. Why am I saying this? Because the way that the algorithm works is that they're going to judge whether or not they send your post to users based on historical affinity to your post. So have they liked, commented, shared? Have they DM'd you? And basically, the scale is like, comment, share, DM. So if somebody DM'd you, that is the highest viral action that they can take. They're almost 90% guaranteed to see your post the next time that you post something. They'll start seeing it at the top of their feed. If they share something, they're also highly likely to see it at the top of your feed. So if you know those things, you know that you need to constantly be engaging your first connections that you can DM so they continually see your content, right? So a lot of people come to me and they're like, hey, Hala, I've got 10,000 followers. I've been on LinkedIn for 5 years. I get no engagement, even though I have all these followers. And my number one thing is, okay, you need to go reinvigorate your first connections. You need to start a campaign where you're giving your first connections some sort of value. You're DMing them so they DM you back. Then they're going to start seeing your stuff at the top of your feed, right? The other thing you can do is make sure that people who are your first connections actually are active on LinkedIn. Have they logged on in the last 30 days? Do they take viral action? You can see their activity. Do they take viral action? Would they be interested in your services or the topics that you speak about? If not, unfollow them, because the second stage of the algorithm is basically sharing your post to a subset of your first connections. And if nobody engages, LinkedIn's going to think that your post sucks. They're not going to keep showing it to other people. So it's all these like little nuances, right? I could go on and on about the different algorithm hacks, but there's so many of them, and you need to understand them in order to succeed on that platform.
Oh my gosh, it's super fascinating. Super fascinating. Now, if you are not very active on LinkedIn, you're not very passionate, and I've worked with so many women who they can't stand the thought of marketing themselves or, bragging about themselves, sharing all about that. What is the first thing that they should do when they get onto LinkedIn and they're like, okay, I'm going to do this?
Yeah. So I think number one, they really need to establish their voice guide. And so I have a LinkedIn masterclass that I do every few months. And basically I take people through this process A to Z to basically align on their personal brand and define it. And so some of the things you need to think about is, what are your values? What is your personality type? What audience are you trying to target? Are they male, female? What are their interests? What are their age? What's their income? What are their titles? Where do they hang out in mass? There's lots of things that you need to figure out about your audience so that you know how to properly target them. Then it's the 4 or 5 messages that transform your audience, make an impact on your audience, improve their lives in some way. The 4 or 5 messages that you're going to repeat over and over and over again, because branding is consistency. That's all branding is. So you want people to understand what you stand for so that they auto share your stuff. People don't want to share Hala Taha. They don't care about Hala Taha. They want to share what I represent, which is you're never too old to try something new. Life is limitless. Go after your dreams. If you fail, learn from it and move on, right? So there's all these different messages that I always say over and over and over again, right? So what are your 4 or 5 messages that you say over and over again? And then how are you going to deliver on those messages? And when you're thinking about your delivery method, you need to understand the platform, what features work and what doesn't work, and also what is available to you. Do you have a book? Do you have original articles that you can chop up? Do you have a podcast that you're gonna create micro clips from? So your delivery method is basically how you're able to deliver that impact with the resources that you have. How are you going to turn your long form content into short form viral content? So that's basically what I walk people through. And through that exercise, you can get your personal branding statement, your brand persona, your brand relationship. So this is something else that's really important. I think that your listeners need to know about is that a lot of people are scared to start their personal brand because they think they have to be the expert. And they're like, well, I'm not ready to be an expert. But you have to understand that there's so many different relationships that you can make with your audience and have with your audience that doesn't have to be expert. And you can always evolve to that. But for now, you could be a cheerleader. You could be a reporter. You could be a coordinator, right? So you don't have to be the expert speaking about a certain topic as if you're the know-it-all of that topic. You can be a reporter and interview people on that topic as you learn instead, right? So there's lots of different ways that you can basically have a relationship with your audience, and that's also something that you should determine before you start. So once you have all that outlined, now you basically have your template to get started, right? You know what you're going to speak about. You know the things that you're going to pull from in order to generate your content. Hopefully you've learned about the algorithm, learned about the features and everything that you need to know before you get started so that you are ahead of the curve from the start. Then you've got to update your profile. This is really important because when you post, the first things people are going to do is click on your profile and see, are you worth following, right? Do you have credibility? Do you have social proof? So make sure you update your LinkedIn banner because that is a huge piece of real estate that is easily updated. And for my LinkedIn banner, I always say this is something that you can update all the time. So for example, if I've got my LinkedIn Academy going on, I'm promoting that. When that's not going on, I'm promoting my podcast. If I've got a book, I'm going to promote my book up there, right? So it's like whenever you're promoting something new, it should be up there. There's a new hyperlink on your profile called the Work With Me link. That is something that gets clicked a lot. So typically in your posts, you get penalized for pointing to external third-party websites because LinkedIn wants to keep people on LinkedIn for as long as possible. But that Work With Me link is not penalized. So go ahead and link to your lead form or whatever it is in your profile, and then update your profile and brag, show your credibility. Show the brands that you've worked with in the past and associate yourself with powerful brands. Like if you've worked with Forbes or, Disney or whatever it is, show those brands, show your accolades, because this is where people are going to determine if you're the real deal or not. So put your testimonials up there and show your credibility.
I love that. And I really love this concept of taking on there's a multitude of options of roles that you could take on. You said the reporter, you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to be the best at something, but you can engage people and build your brand based off of a type of role. And you alluded a little bit to this, but why would somebody need to differentiate how they show up on LinkedIn versus how they show up on TikTok or Instagram? And can they post the exact same content in different platforms?
You can post the same ideas and concepts and material, but the way that you post is going to be different because every platform is totally different in terms of the way that the algorithm works and the features that they're pushing, right? So on Instagram, IG Reels are all the rage. IG Reels is really the only way to get organic reach because Instagram is trying to be video first, competing with TikTok. LinkedIn, it does not have that initiative. They're not trying to be video first. In fact, IG Reels, if you posted it on LinkedIn, would do terrible. They don't do well on LinkedIn, right? The best type of video feature to use is LinkedIn live stream. That performs a lot better than a short video clip. And on LinkedIn, for example, if I was to take an IG reel concept and I wanted to put it on LinkedIn, I would turn it into a story with a photo on LinkedIn, because that's what performs on LinkedIn. But on Instagram, I would do it as a 30-second reel, especially if it was like some sort of educational post. Now, motivational videos that are 30 seconds that stand out in the feed, that are vertical and take up a lot of real estate, actually do well on LinkedIn. So if it's a motivational video with like kids running, or like kids outside, or people running a race, or something that's going to really stand out on the LinkedIn feed, and it's easy to understand with the sound off. So this is a key thing on LinkedIn. Many people are working while they're on LinkedIn. So this is why videos don't do that well also, is because it's not kids, it's adults who are at work working, and they're engaging with their stuff in between meetings. They don't necessarily have the sound on their videos. So they're watching a lot of this with the sound off. So if it's engaging with the sound off and motivational, it could also work well as a video on LinkedIn. So you just got to understand the features of every platform. And it's definitely not something you can just copy paste. It's never like that on almost any social platform. You can't just really copy and paste. You've got to be pretty intentional about what you're posting.
Yeah, it's very strategic nowadays. I will say that for sure.
Yeah.
But I want to kind of switch gears on you, because you teach all of this information in your free masterclasses. I want to direct people over there. But when I see you, when other people see you, they see this woman who is put together. She is crushing it. She's got her own business, this very successful podcast. How did we get to this place? Because I feel like this can't be all of it. And I think that there's a sticky floor, which those are the limiting beliefs, the toxic behaviors, imposter syndrome, perfectionism, fear, burnout, that might have been in your life somewhere. Did you experience a sticky floor before you really just boomed into this amazing, successful woman?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like I think my 4 years in corporate where I let go of my dream, like there was 4 years after I got rejected from MTV, and I went and got my MBA and started working at Hewlett Packard at the same time. I literally never thought I would get on a mic again. And this was my dream from when I was little. Like I remember being like a young girl, and my dad would tell me, "Oh, I think you're going to be a news anchor." And my brother would tell me, "I think you're going to be a sportscaster." Like everybody thought that I was going to be in this world, which I ended up being in this world, right? And for 4 years, I totally let go of my dream. And it's because I just didn't think that I was good enough, and that it just seemed impossible, right? But for some reason, I was able to get back on my feet. And I think it was really just me, just again, listening to my heart, right? I was going against my intuition for 4 years, and I started listening to my heart again. And I decided, with really pure intentions, I had this great career. I was like making well over 6 figures at HP. And then I moved to Disney Streaming and started making even more money. And I was leading teams at Disney and everything like this. And I literally started my podcast with the purest intentions. I thought it was going to be a hobby. For literally 2 years. One of the reasons why I had stagnant growth probably also is because I didn't want to monetize it. I was only doing it to just help other people and to satisfy my dreams that I thought would never come true. So I started this podcast to serve other people, to be able to meet really successful people and learn from them, and mostly to just help other people, because I had succeeded in corporate, I had failed as an entrepreneur, and I thought I could speak to both types of people and just help young people level up their lives. And because I had really pure intentions, from the start, I had a volunteer team. For 2 years, I had 20 people who worked for free for me and for the podcast. So that's how I was able to do the podcast. I have this top podcast as a side hustle for 2 years and work full time, was because I had people from all over the world that were literally helping me for free, because they also wanted to support the mission of helping people improve their careers and businesses with me. And so I would just teach and train these interns to help me with videos or social media or whatever. And then that actually evolved into my company now. And so basically 2 years into the podcast, I had grown on LinkedIn, and I became like one of the biggest influencers on LinkedIn. I had this great podcast that was produced super well, had a lot of listeners, had a lot of credibility. I wasn't a huge podcaster yet, but everybody thought I was a huge podcaster. And these guests would come on my show, And at the end of the show, they'd always say to me the same thing, Hala, who does your LinkedIn? Who does your podcast? Can you help me? And for the longest time, I would just say, no, I'm so sorry. I have a volunteer team. I can't help you. I've got this great career. This is just a hobby. And I would always just give some excuse. No, I can't help you. This is a hobby. Thank you very much. Right. And then finally, when COVID happened, I found myself with more free time because I didn't have a commute anymore. And I was going through some personal stuff as well. So I just found myself with more free time. And then I decided that I was going to start this company, and I turned my volunteers into paid employees, and I started to scale my company. That's when everything really blew up. 6 months later, I was making well over $100,000 a month. Then I finally quit my job. Imagine I had 30 people all around the world working for me. I was making like $120,000 a month already with my agency, and I was still working at Disney because I was so afraid of actually taking this full time and really just pivoting. But then I did, and that's when everything really skyrocketed because I had my full focus on the podcast and growth. I started to monetize my podcast. I started to build this agency, build the processes, hire a bigger team, hire more of an executive leadership team. And then a year and a half ago, I started my podcast network because essentially I figured out how to monetize my shows and the other shows that I produced. And I realized I had built a podcast network. So then I started just recruiting more shows to help them grow and monetize. So now we've got like this whole podcast empire, and it had just really pure organic beginnings. So we just were a podcast trying to help people.
So Hala, what I find so fascinating about this is it seems like you had all of these little signs guiding you along the way almost, and you just trusted in them and you took the steps and you took the action. But how did you find the courage to truly make that leap and walk away from corporate and go all in on your business?
It wasn't alone. It was listening to a mentor. So Heather Monahan is my first client. And she was really the bug in my ear to start my business and to quit my job. And I had a lot of naysayers in my life. When I started my business, I left my partner of 12 years, who was basically my husband, but we were not married. And he did not want me to start this business. He was very against it. And so for 6 months, also one of the reasons why I didn't quit my job at Disney, I was basically doing this all at night, almost behind his back, because he was so against it and was just like so mean to me whenever I'd bring up my business or whatever it was. And so I had to break up with him in order to actually take this full time. So that was one thing. My mom was scared because she's just an immigrant that thinks that the only way you can be successful is like being a doctor or a lawyer. And I already was in corporate and not following her dreams. So she was against it, you know? So and like my best friends were really against it. They thought they were like basically making fun of me. Why are you doing this? Like, you're too old. I was told I was too old. I wasn't even 30 years old. You're too old to start a podcast. And so like everybody was against me doing this, even starting my podcast, let alone starting my business. So I had to learn really fast that you can't take advice from people, even if they love you so much, even if they mean well. You can't take advice from people who don't have the same dreams as you or have achieved what you want to achieve, right? And so all these people who have never achieved anything in the same realm are trying to give me advice on what to do and what not to do. And then I have Heather Monahan, who's literally like who I want to be in 10 years at the time, telling me, Hala, you've got an amazing podcast. You've got to focus on this. Hala, you have an agency that's better than VaynerMedia. It's a volunteer group, but you can turn this into an agency. Let me be your first client. You can test bed it with me. Hala, you're making $100,000 a month now. You got to quit your job at Disney. Like, she was in my ear. I remember I called her up. She was in the grocery store and Disney didn't want me to leave. And I was like, hey, I think I'm not going to leave. Like, they offered me more pay. They want to do this, this, and that. And she was in the grocery store, like yelling at me, like, you better quit your job today, Hala. Like, and she really pushed me. And thank God, because she was the only one who I could trust. Heather Monahan, for anybody who doesn't know, is a top podcaster. She's a huge LinkedIn influencer. She's a speaker. She's an entrepreneur, all these things, right? And she was like, Hala, please, like, you've got this. Trust yourself. Go for it. And it was with her guidance that started my business and was able to quit my job because I didn't have anybody else to talk to or who was supporting me. So it was a mentor.
What I have found is that most people who are projecting those types of fears and worries are because those are the fears that they have themselves, because they are in a much smaller box than where you want to go, where I want to go. So I completely resonate, and I really resonate with that. One of the things that you touched on is the mentor. And I think community is such a big piece of keeping that momentum, trusting your faith, and putting in the work, even when you are not seeing the output. What are your thoughts on community?
Community is so important. I mean, one of the reasons why for years I was able to just do my podcast consistently every single week, even without getting money or results, is the fact that we were changing so many lives and that my fans would reach out and, tell me how much the show meant to them. A lot of those fans were actually the volunteers. All the volunteers for the podcast were actually fans who reached out and was like, you've changed my life so much. How can I help? How can I spread this message? And then I would bring them onto my team if they were interested, right? So community for me is just so important. And to this day, I am so obsessed with community. So whether that's creating it for my mastermind for LinkedIn and helping people level up on LinkedIn, or for my podcast, I'm always all about talking to my fans, talking to listeners, getting their feedback. And really, as somebody who's an expert on building personal brands, you've got to bring people along your journey, right? You can't just talk down to people. It's got to be two-way communication. So I'm always hopping on live streams, having webinars, and I really like to talk to my community.
I love that. And I usually wrap up my podcast, Hala, with always asking, what is the one piece of advice that you would give the Hala from years ago? But I'm going to steal something from your playbook, and I'm going to say, what is your secret to profiting in life?
Oh, I love that. So I think my secret to profiting in life is to truly believe that anything is possible, right? I think that a lot of people are just getting in their own way. They've got these limiting beliefs. They don't try before they feel that they're 100% ready. And what I'm going to tell you now is that no one's 100% ready. No one is 100% ready. Nobody is perfect, but you've just got to start. I think a lot of people have a problem with just starting and figuring it out. It's always going to feel bad at first. It's always going to feel like it sucks to feel like you suck at something, right? But the more that you try and get better, there's a motivation loop that happens. You try, you get better. And because you got better, you are more likely to try again and keep going and keep going. So it's like starting is the hardest part. So try your best if you want to do something to get started and understand that it's going to feel bad at first and try to push through that, because eventually as you get better at something, it feels better to do it. And so I think, for a lot of people, just getting started is the hardest part. So believe in yourself that you can actually do the thing that you want to do, and then really push yourself to get started and give yourself some sort of timeline or deliverable that you've got to achieve to really give it a shot. Then keep going even when it doesn't feel like you're not getting any results, because that's when the magic happens, right? Nothing happens without hard work and consistency. And I think people give up way too fast.
Yes, and nothing happens inside your comfort zone. And I think this is the perfect segue to say, if you do want some help getting started, again, you offer so many amazing resources. How can people find you, work with you, get in a masterclass, and join your community?
Sure. So if you guys are specifically interested in LinkedIn, you can go to yapmedia.io/course, and that will have information about my next LinkedIn masterclass, which is going to be in December. And if Erica, you want to give your community 30% off, I'm happy to do that. We can use, what code do you like to use, Erica?
We can use it. I don't know. I'll think of one. Erica Rocks. How about that?
Erica Rocks would be perfect for 30% off at yapmedia.io/course for my December class. So we'll stick that information in the show notes. I'll give more information to Erica, and support Erica because she'll get some compensation if any of you guys sign up. And you can also follow me on my podcast. It's called Young and Profiting. It's a top 10 business podcast on Apple. I've interviewed people like Matthew McConaughey, Alex Hormozi, Grant Cardone, Daymond John. So it's an amazing show. I work really, really hard at it. I think you guys are going to love it. It's called Young and Profiting. And you guys can also find me on LinkedIn by searching my name. It's Hala Taha, and Instagram at YAP, Y-A-P, with Hala, H-A-L-A. Thanks, Erica.
I love it. Thank you so much, Hala. I truly believe that time is the most valuable resource that we have. So thank you for spending your time with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hala is the expert that you want to listen to, y'all. And I have learned so much from her. But if you aren't quite at the level of Hala yet, you can take my free 23-minute Level Up Your LinkedIn course. I am going to drop the link in the show notes. It's quick, it's easy, it's going to get you up and running and get you started. But this is your reminder. It's time for you to stop putting a ceiling on what is possible and start breaking through them. I'll see you next time.